if we hold our elections, now that we are of course going to hold our elections in 2027, are we going to have this, endless cycle of we now have to count, agree or disagree on the election date, so that in 2027 we begin arguing whether it should be 2031 or 2032. Then when we get to 2031, we now again disputing whether it is 2035 or 39.
Bringing us to exactly 3 minutes past 11 a.m. Good morning. Welcome to Haki FM, the oasis of justice. My name is Terry Njueni, and you are listening to the Law and Justice Show. And as you know, Wednesday is a day that we get to have a guest in studio, and we talk about matters of the law, matters of the Constitution, current affairs, and how they relate to the law. But before we get into our discussion today, remember we are streaming live at hakifm.haki/institute.or.ke, and you can listen in at Facebook Live or TikTok Live, and you can send your questions, comments at Haki FM1 on X, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. I hope you have had a fantastic week so far, and I want us to talk about something that has been doing rounds on social media. It recently happened towards the end of last week, where the court ruled that elections should be held in 2026 on the second Tuesday of August. And we want to unpack this discussion along with IEBC. Are they ready to hold the elections? Going into the elections and the campaign period, what are we supposed to expect? What does the law require of these institutions? And to help me unpack this topic, I am in studio with Wakili Timothy Mwichigi. And it's not his first time here, but nonetheless, for a listener who has tuned in for the first time, I will let him introduce himself. Wakili, karibu sana.
Asante sana.
Take it away.
So my name is Mwichigi Kamau, and I'm glad to be here for this conversation. Just about what needs to be done, our preparations for elections in 2027. And perhaps I should mention that my participation as a voter started way back in 2002. I voted the first time in 2002.
Wow.
That was, I think, yes, that's when Kibaki became president.
Mm-hmm.
In the 2007 election cycle,
mm-hmm.
I did participate with the then commission. First, I did voter education. We had a program for 3 months on voter education, so I got to know my constituency very, very well. Well, except for that particular task, I wanted to run for, a constituency position for youth representative.
Which year was this?
That the lead up to the 2007 election.
Okay.
So we had NAC Kenya, and I participated at the ward level. We didn't have very many people participating, so I got my 12 votes. The winner got 24 votes.
Not bad.
So that's where I started,
mm-hmm.
And of course then with the voter education, got to interact with people. In 2013, I just participated like any other Kenyan, but in the 2017 I was an observer, because we did observe, because we were having prisoners vote for the first time, and so part of our task was to be observers to see that the prisoners have been allowed to vote. They were voting for one position, and I think 2022 wasn't really very interested. Yeah, but I think again 2027 is a cycle that I would be very, very interested. Not as an official of IEBC,
mm-hmm.
Because at this time I think I should be an agent for my favorite presidential candidate.
Do you feel comfortable to mention?
we will discuss that as as we go.
Okay, Wakili, I want us to begin on something that took the country by surprise, whereby the High Court ruled that the general election ought to be held in August 2026 and not the scheduled August 2027, whereby the court declared that the presidential election should be held on the second Tuesday within the 5th year and not after the 5th year. Could you help us break this down, and what was the reasoning behind this decision, and what are we looking at going forward?
Very, very well. I think I would begin by just indicating that this was decision like number 5 in relation to the election date. We have had several other decisions by different courts, but of course they're arriving at different interpretations. And one of the some of the issues that were being raised now have been raised before, but what we seem not to have had is sort of a final settlement on which should be the election date. In 2016, about 2016, 2015, 2016, there was a number of MCAs who approached the High Court, and what they were seeking is that the court could declare. So they were looking at their term being shortened, and so they were questioning the rationale of having elections in August of 2017. So there were 2 issues in that particular petition. Number 1 is the election date, because they were arguing that they were elected in March of 2013, and the Constitution provides for a 5-year term. It will be of interest to you that it's only for MCAs where the Constitution is pretty explicit. Then the other issue they were raising is that now that if elections are held in August of 2017, their term will have been shortened by about 8 months. And so they were seeking compensation. So the High Court did agree with them and granted their prayers. But when this matter went to the Court of Appeal, the Court of Appeal held no, you are really not really entitled to that extra period because of the constitutional provisions that the elections must be held on the second Tuesday of August in the 5th year. So remember, 2017 was the 5th year if you count from 2013, 14 all the way. So in that regard, then you notice that the court had made a decision, but there were others that have followed. So, and the way the 2022 elections were held, there were arguments that we needed to have held those elections in 2021, and then now this decision. So that's a bit of the background. Now the main argument in this decision was that the way we count from the 1st year to the 5th year, and so the petitioners argued that we ought to have elections within the 5th year and not after the 5th year. So if ideally this decision had come a bit earlier, maybe today you and I would be maybe not here in the studio. We would be waiting for election results.
Yeah.
But this is a bit of a problem in the way this interpretation has come.
So going forward, what now happens? Did the court pronounce itself on now what will happen going forward, or we will have a similar situation, say, in 2032?
I do not think we're going to have a similar situation. And we will take a moment to read some of the articles. But maybe the very first thing we need to do is to go back in time. What were the issues? Why did we end up with these constitutional provisions that indicate when the elections are going to be held? First off, I've read about this, the 1992 elections, 1992 all the way to 2007, it was the president who would determine when elections are going to be held. And so there are days, or within the election years, there were times the elections would be held on the 27th, others on the 29th. So you wouldn't be very sure which date the elections are going to be held, because the then constitution made provision for that the president would, get parliament to convene or prorogue it. So determine when you convene and when you decide when you go home. So if the president decides we are done, that is it. So it used to be, it was his sacred card. So that's a bit of the history. So in the constitution making process, the people said, no, we need to be certain about when elections are going to be held. Now, there are a number of considerations in terms of arriving at August. First, because of the climatic weather conditions during end of the year. I remember there is one of the years, I think 1997, there were floods in some parts of the country. So ballot papers took too long. You're preparing today expecting that you'll be able to deliver ballots by end of day, and then the following day you have elections. But that became disrupted by the weather. So towards the end of the year, there are places where there will be a lot of rains. So that was one of the considerations, that we need to have a period within the year when the weather conditions are better. The second issue that came up was, if you look at the aftermath of 2007 and the days when the schools resume, then there was the need to sort of provide a little more time between the date you announce elections, the results, and the date children report back to school. And that's why we have August, which is historically a holiday
School
month.
holiday, yeah.
Then there was the issue of budgets. So you have the new financial year just beginning in July. Then we have the elections in August, so that's pretty early within the financial year. So that the new government then has opportunity to set in place its own, the policies that they are going to use, and be able to prepare, better for their time in office, so in the next budget cycle. So there were now those several considerations that gave us August. Then, so when you look at that bit of history, the need for certainty and the need to reduce the disruptions, then we settled on August. Now, your question is, what happens then in the
Going forward?
Yes. So when you look at the history, we needed certainty, and it goes without saying that we would need to be certain when the next elections are going to be held. Now, when you look at some of the constitutional provisions, including the court paid a lot of attention to Article 136, but there's also Article 170, the provision that is about term of office for members of the county assembly. So perhaps we take a moment and have a look at that. Yes, Article 177 for a county assembly is elected for a term of 5 years. And I know the court also did take a look at that provision. So then you begin to ask yourself, going forward, how many years do we count to the next? So first, certainty. Number two, that the date for election of members of the National Assembly, the governors, the senators, and the president, we are not given specific timelines, but we are given a specific timeline of a term for members of the county assembly. So in terms of interpretation, the way the interpretation ought to go is so that you do not have one constitutional provision appearing to be interpreted in a manner that destroys the other one. The other thing is looking at, people want certainty. So do we, if we hold our elections, now that we are of course going to hold our elections in 2027, are we going to have this, endless cycle of we now have to count, agree or disagree on the election date, so that in 2027 we begin arguing whether it should be 2031 or 2032. Then when we get to 2031, we now again disputing whether it is 2035 or 39. That could be very problematic. And I know one of the things Kenyans would want to avoid is attempting to reopen parts of the constitution, perhaps given the level of trust with the political class, because the political class would have to be involved. So one of the ways to deal with it is, now that we have already established a pattern, and there's a level of comfort with the pattern, why don't we stick to that pattern? So my own view is, we have our elections in 2027, and the next one we have it in 2032, the next one we have it in 5 years down the line, that should be 37, on and on, because then that helps people settle on the election date. Because let's make an assumption here that you want to run for a public office in one of the election cycles. Which one do you prepare for? Do you prepare to run for MP in your constituency in 2031, or do you go to 2032? Because when you're doing that, you're considering that your engagement with the people, the resources that you may need, there's need for certainty. Yes, so my personal view is that interpretation that we got last week, I think we needed the court needed to reflect a little bit more. And perhaps now that we already have the decision, I would urge that IEBC appeals, so that we settle the question. And in the event, the Court of Appeal does agree with the High Court, we go further to the Supreme Court, so that the Supreme Court settles that question. How do we arrive at the 5th year? Is it within the 5th year, or it is after the 5th year? Or when we say that we have already started the 5th year, is it the 5th year for the particular office bearers, or do we just look at the calendar years and then say it is second Tuesday of August in the 5th year, without necessarily looking at when did the term start? Yes.
Okay.
And maybe just one more.
Yeah.
So we start counting the 5th year from the date of elections, or do we then look at the date we declare results, either for the president or for...
Wakili, if I am hearing you right, we are talking about a problem in interpretation.
Yes.
The problem is coming from interpretation. Will it not be easier to amend these parts that are not clear and make them clear, to settle this once and for all?
That would be an argument. But then you also have to ask yourself, do we need to have the Constitution make provision for everything, including setting dates? What happens to, basically, what would happen to good manners? Because we would have a challenge with first of all, going to amend the constitution, we have the formula for amendment. And if you look at the context, is that one senator is the senator who made a proposal to extend the terms and make it a 7-year one-off.
Yeah.
So do we want to give them that opportunity? We might want to avoid such a situation now. So I think the best thing that we can do is let's stick to sort of common sense rules. The Constitution gives us a broader framework and makes provision for when elections are going to be held. So 136 is specifically when we are going to have elections for members of parliament. And then we tie the election date for the president to that of the members of parliament. Then we also tie the term of office for governors to that of members of parliament. So it means that when we are looking at that provision, we start off with which is the date for election of members of parliament. Because again, if you look at Article 1 and look at how power is delegated, we do not begin with the executive, which is where the president is. We begin with the parliament and the county assemblies. But then to get more certain is after we have elected the members of parliament, we ask ourselves, does the constitution contain a provision that gives us the specifics? And the specifics, we get it 177 for a term of 5 years. So there is a whole level of certainty. And even if you look at the numbers of members of parliament, you're 416. When you look at the members of county assemblies, the number is larger. So if you were to say, let's do a common sense approach, which one do you go with? You go with the majority, because those many MCAs also represent the whole idea of representation, term of office for in the minds of ordinary people. That's why they wanted to stick that to, let's have it as a 5-year term. Yes.
Okay. Wakili, it is safe to say that the countdown is officially on in terms of the general elections, which
Yes.
will be held. We can confidently say exactly a year from now.
Yes.
And we need to look at what does the law say. Where do the IEBC and the law meet? What provisions are there? What mandates does the IEBC have in this period leading up to elections? But I want to take a short break, and we will have that discussion on the other side of this break. It is exactly 25 minutes past 11. You are listening to the Law and Justice Show with me, Change Weni. I am with Wakili Timothy Mwichigi in studio, and we are talking about the 2027 countdown, the elections, the IEBC, and the law. Wakili, welcome back.
Thank you.
I want us now to shift gears a little bit and look at what does the Constitution and the electoral law require IEBC to do in this period that is leading up to a general election, and what does this mandate look like? Because as we have said, the countdown is officially on. We have 1 year to elections. What does the law require of IEBC? And maybe you can go a step further and tell us whether IEBC is doing that which it is required to do by the law.
Thank you. So first is the IEBC is established under Article 88 of the Constitution, which makes provisions for how you constitute the commission, and sub-article 4 provides a bit of the detail of what IEBC should do. And of course, there is the registration of voters, there is the delimitation of constituencies and wards, and I must say we cannot do the delimitation now. So if you are to ask if there are any problems, that is part of where we begin, and we have a serious problem with the delimitation of constituencies. But I'll revisit that in a moment. Then the regulation of parties on how they nominate their candidates, giving timelines, and the settlement of electoral disputes is among the big functions of IEBC. And when they're doing this, they are to be guided by the Constitution. So you have Article 10 making provisions for guidance on how elections should be, the whole process should be managed. So, but if we could revisit a little bit about what IEBC has done or has not done, a few that are already in the public domain. First, we had a problem because we didn't have commissioners for a pretty long period. So, and that is an issue that has affected the functioning of IEBC. So we blame the political class for doing that. We just got the chair just the other day and the commissioner. So that's a bit of a problem. The other issue is we have not had a delimitation of constituencies and wards for more than 12 years now, because the last time we did this was in 2011, 2010, 2011.
Sorry, when you talk about delimitation, please break that down to my listener. What do we mean by that? Delimitation of
what we mean is looking at there's a national formula for determining the constituency size. And the constituency size is not geographic, but the number of people per constituency. When you go to Article 88, it gives a formula for how you determine the number of people in a constituency, and in the urban areas and in the rural areas, and also how you, but just gives a guide on how you determine the size of wards. Now, that function ought to be undertaken by IEBC at intervals of not less than 8 years and not more than 12 years. So the last time we had that was in 2011. Now, so between 2011, that was in preparation for, it was about 2011 in preparation for the 2012-2013 elections. We are in 2026, so that's about going to 15 years. We have not revised the number of we are not revising the number of constituencies, but rather we're just revising which do we need to create new constituencies in certain areas, and do we need to merge certain constituencies in other areas. Maybe because the number of people has not increased, say in I don't want to pick Lamu, because I think Lamu is a special case because of the number of people. But if you look at a constituency like Ruiru, which has over 200,000 registered voters, by 2022 there were nearly 250. So if you look at such a constituency, and then you look at a constituency like, so you have Ruiru, you have Juja, you go to Nakuru. Some of these constituencies the numbers have grown exponentially. But there are also others where the numbers have remained stagnant for this whole period, or the adjustment is minimal. And so if you do a formula based on the last population or the current population estimates, there are constituencies that we need to have merged. And we needed to have created new constituencies so that the representation is fair. And that has not happened. So I would think that one of the issues IEBC would need to revisit as soon as we are done with the 2027 elections is to go about delimitation of constituencies and wards. So the other work you have asked about the role of IEBC in terms of the whole preparation. IEBC is required to set up a mechanism for resolution of disputes that arise from the process. And to do that, IEBC has to be seen, it has to be perceived as an institution that is running its operations within the law. There should not be accusations such as some that I heard yesterday, that IEBC should be, in essence, like the Caesar's wife. There should be no reason to doubt what IEBC is doing. So between now and 2027, set up systems for this dispute resolution. The second one should be that there are new voters who have not been registered, and we need to be able to register those new voters. Because the last time we did this voter registration was April, March this year. But there are other people who have now turned 18. There are those who did not, maybe because the interest then, they were not very interested in the whole process. So we need to be able to have a registration of voters, a final one. Then we need to also have cleaning of the register. There are people who have died. So that we need to have a register that is very clean. There is also the need for IEBC to procure systems. And when this is happening, it has to be done in a manner that gives confidence to the people. There's a maxim on justice, that justice must not only be done, but it must be seen to be done, to be believed. So, for IEBC, between now and August of 2027, there's going to be a lot about perception. And some of the perceptions would be informed by the previous conduct. So, for example, if IEBC was perceived by a few people in Olkalau to be behaving in a particular way, then IEBC has to find a way of dispelling the fears that arose from its conduct in the Olkalau elections. Those that arose from the by-election in Embu, it also has to deal with some of those challenges. When it is procuring, it has to procure in a manner that is very transparent, ensure that those who are putting in bids do so and they are qualified, so that we also do not have a protracted process challenging the procurement process. The other thing is in how IEBC regulates. It has already gazetted. It has already gazetted a code of conduct. They have also gazetted campaign financing framework. I'm not very sure it has captured all the issues, because one of the key questions is, if you're financing a campaign for a candidate, where did the money come from? And how are these candidates going to account for the money that they will have received at the end? And of course, we have had questions of someone is running for the position of an MP, and then they spend up to 100 million to run a campaign. So then you ask yourself, if you're spending 100 million to run for a position that would pay you a maximum of 60 million in 5 years, what exactly are we missing? So in terms of regulating the whole campaign financing, it also has to put in place measures to prevent this election process becoming an opportunity for money laundering. Because, money, they could use the opportunity to just, clean their money. So those are some of the issues that I would point out as far as the role of IEBC and the constitutional framework is concerned. But IEBC is also governed by the Elections Act. And there's also the framework on election offences, and to be seen to be a proper and fully functioning umpire in the election process, the code of conduct, the election offences law, they have to implement it. they should not be seen to favor certain candidates, whether the candidates are in no, not even candidates, parties, whether the candidates are in support of the sitting government or in the opposition.
Wakili, I did not hear you mention anything to do with voter education and maybe mass voter registration. Maybe you can touch on that a bit.
So the issue of mass voter registration is IEBC has there's already a provision for continuous voter registration. So any Kenyan wishing to register as a voter, including transferring from one constituency to another, they have an opportunity. They can go to the IEBC offices and be able to, to do that. But then there is also, because we have had it as a practice of mass voter registration, IEBC may need to give us, some time, either end of the year or at the start of the new year, a timeline for mass voter registration, because mass voter registration gives opportunity for those who have turned 18, they have collected their IDs, to be able to do that. And as far as voter education is concerned, I think one of the things we celebrate now is that we have more platforms for voter education. I did mention that in 2007 I participated in the voter education process, but it was also fairly costly as compared to what it would be now. So IEBC needs to not wait until January or February of 2027 to start voter education. Voter education ought to start very early. Even if they will not go to what you call mainstream media, there are very many media platforms that they can use for purposes of voter education. And in the event IEBC does not have the resources that it needs, then this can be taken up by other players. The civil society organizations, the religious organizations can take up the opportunity for purposes of voter registration. Yes.
And now let me ask Wakili, who is there to ensure that IEBC is doing what it's supposed to do? Do we have an institution that should hold or is looking at IEBC to ensure that they are doing what they're supposed to do? They are calling them out when they're not doing that. If maybe they have procured these systems, who is there to verify that these systems were procured in the right way? How do me as Mwananchi verify that? You talked about something about IEBC clearing the data maybe of people who passed on and all that. How do we access this information, and how do we ensure that IEBC is doing what it's supposed to do?
So if we begin with who is there to hold IEBC accountable. IEBC is first and foremost accountable to the people. And so whatever it does, it has to do that within the provisions of the Constitution and the other enabling legislation. So ideally, we should not be even asking IEBC what it is doing. IEBC should be coming forth every so often to tell us that this is what we are doing. I know if you ask them today, they will say, yes, we have in place a mechanism because we have a communications person and all that. But ideally, we need to be able to see the chair giving assurances that whatever the steps we are taking, we are doing this transparently. Our procurement process, we are doing it transparently. The way we are monitoring, political parties that are pushing certain candidates, we are doing this transparently. So that is number one. So there's the accountability to the people. And that also means, in terms of a reciprocal approach, is that citizens ought to keep IEBC in check. We do not have to wait for for MPs to raise concerns, but ordinary citizens ought to be able to do that. The second level is through Parliament. I know most of us will have issues with which MP are you talking about, which senator, but Parliament collectively and through the relevant committees ought to also keep IEBC in check. I know that some of them will be candidates in the coming election, but that does not in any way discount their role in terms of holding IEBC to account. The other institution we have would be the courts, so that if there is a misstep, we can always go to the court and ask that IEBC accounts for how it is conducting itself. Because of course, if you look at Article 22, it gives us leeway to approach the court for when you have an imminent threat to our constitution or constitutional rights. So we can go to the court for that. Lastly, would go to the civil society organizations, and I am looking at the religious organizations, and I'm also looking at the civic space sort of organizations, and we can already see that on Monday, and I know yesterday there has been convenings for the civil society organizations to deliberate on some of the issues that need to be addressed by IEBC. So we have all these institutions that every one of them needs to do their duty and hold IEBC to account. I should say that one of the reasons that we need to hold IEBC to account a little more closely is if you look at our history, every time the transitional elections, we would usually not have as many problems. When you have a president outgoing, we don't have as many problems as we do during an attempt to retain the seat. So if you look back in the 90s, there was significant violence in a number of areas in the country in the lead up to the 1997 general elections. Then when you look at the 2007, we had serious issues relating to, because in 1997, Moi was seeking to retain the seat as president. In 2007, Kibaki was seeking to retain his seat as president. And then you have 2000 and of course, 2007, we ended up with post-election violence. A lot of lives were lost and disruptions in the economic system, including our schools. Then in 2017, we again had similar challenges. So we wait until the election date, we have elections, and then you have post-election violence, which disrupted again people's lives, and lives were lost in the 2017 elections. Now, as we head to the 2027 election, again, we are seeing signs. Those signs have already been too glaring. Goons, we have seen political violence happening, because again, you see the sitting president has his supporters, and the opposition have their supporters, and they are bound to be clashes on how you interpret the law, clashes on how the law is applied, clashes on how the police system is responding to the violence, how they are responding to offenses. So if for example you have two individuals, one supporting the sitting president and one belonging to the other side, and they have issues, do we see equality in terms of how disputes are being handled? So why the 2027 makes it more critical is because you look at the history and then you ask yourself, are we likely to have peaceful elections? Perhaps you could say yes, but are we also going to have a peaceful time post-election? Or are there people who are going to lose their lives because they voted in a particular way? So, and this makes it more critical that IEBC must be seen as an institution that is very independent, not just in the name, but also in how it conducts itself. The places, it's unfortunate, by the way, that even the places the commissioners will go to, now you can invite them for your wedding and they will not show up if you are perceived to be belonging to a particular party, because then it could give the impression that they're not being very neutral. So
yeah. And now, Akili, how would you rate the performance of the IEBC so far, based on the functions that you have stated?
On a scale of 1 to 10,
Sure.
I would give IEBC a 6. A few things. The commission is already in office. Fortunately, we do not have a substantive CEO. We have an acting CEO at the moment. Perhaps that's one issue that needs to be resolved fairly quickly. The other one is some of the statements that have been issued by parties, and including the statement that was issued 2 days ago by the civil society organizations, pointing out at certain challenges that IEBC must resolve. So I think for me, until they're able to confidently respond to these concerns, I wouldn't go higher than 6.